Welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for Sunday, March 2nd. Brought to you by Vunabaka.com, a new residential community under construction with quick access to world-class surfing and diving and more in Fiji. We start this week's report with a look at the significant wave heights for the North Pacific. As of Sunday, currently remnants of a gale off of Southern California, swell that is, and seas are radiating into Baja and Southern California. Of more interest is a larger system, seas in the 24-25 foot range, pushing east from north of Hawaii. This is the previous incarnation of a storm that was over the dateline and is currently pushing rather large swell into the Hawaiian Islands. Also of interest, tropical system, far west Pacific, not particularly large seas, but it is interesting that there is any tropical system this time of year in the West Pacific. This is the result of westerly wind burst and the active phase of the MJO. We'll get into that more in a minute. First up on our tour is the jet stream analysis. These are winds blowing at the 30,000 foot range, 250 millibar. These direct the formation of storms and the track of storms flowing across the North Pacific Ocean. As of right now, we have a rather diffuse flow, but at least not a split jet stream. That is basically winds moving off of Japan in the up to 140 knot range in a pocket, but generally pretty weak, flowing more or less flat across the entire Pacific and right into Central California, focused on the Point Conception area. One small trough over the dateline in the Hawaii region. This is not a deep trough, just sort of a broad generalized trough, not a lot of wind support, but still capable of providing maybe limited support for gale development in that region. Otherwise, everything seems to be going pretty much flat west to east on the 35 north latitude, generally what we would call a zonal flow. We'll put this into motion, see what's going to go on for the next 72 plus hours. Notice a little more wind energy starts building off Japan by Monday night into Tuesday. The trough deepens a little bit north of Hawaii. Not a lot of wind energy in the apex or the bottom of the trough here, but notice up to 190 knot winds near the dateline, falling into the trough, and a little bit more energy in the 140, 150 knot range. Ridging out of the trough, pushing into Northern California. This is again by mid-Tuesday. And then you get into Wednesday. The wind energy holds. Trough doesn't particularly look any better, but not any worse either. It's limited support for gale development in this region. A little bit more dugout right here closer to the U.S. West Coast, 72 hours out or on Wednesday. Continue to put this into motion, and things just sort of flatten off. You actually get a little bit of a split starting to go in here over Kamchatka. That's not particularly a good sign, but wind energies hold decently going across the Pacific. We're into the end of the week, Friday again, a little bit of a trough, still trying to hang north of Hawaii. What was this split pretty much is gone now. Still a zone of flow with a bit of a ridge, so this would direct most of the weather energy up into British Columbia relative to the U.S. West Coast. Not a lot of support for gale development. We continue to roll this out. Wind energy builds by next weekend. We're up to 160 knots off Japan. The hope is at some point that'll filter into some sort of a trough in here and help gale formation a little bit. Otherwise, we have a ridge over the U.S. West Coast. Pretty much anything south of San Francisco looks to be high and dry, but north of there, potential for weather, and especially up into British Columbia, snow and rain at lower elevations. And you roll this out, and no big change through the end of the loop. So, all the way through the week, basically a zonal flow, a little bit of support early in the week for a trough over north of Hawaii, but nothing really stands out as great in terms of supporting storm development. Next, we'll take a look at surface level pressure, surface level winds. These winds are actually the winds that impact the ocean surface, generate significant wave heights, which in turn produce swell and radiate away from the fetch area to produce surf. Right now we're looking at the remnants of a gale, actually a storm that was previously over the dateline a few days earlier. We'll get into some of the details on that storm in a minute. The swell from it is currently hitting the Hawaiian Islands. There's still fetch out there, 35, 40 knots, aimed at the Hawaiian Islands. Here we go down the roughly 328 degree Great Circle path, but also providing fetch aimed at Northern California and Southern California, though most of the winds are kind of cutting across the Great Circle path, anywhere in the 285, 292 degree range. Put this into motion, see how it plays out over the next several days. Also of note, tropical system in the West Pacific. Tropical storm force winds have been reported. It's a rather minor system, not anything in terms of swell production, but the fact that it exists in the northern hemisphere in the West Pacific in March is significant. All attributable to the active phase of the MJO and a westerly wind burst that is occurring there. In fact, you can see full-on westerly winds on the equator occurring now. That is a complete reversal of trades and is a good sign for long term. Notice trades the whole way across till about you get to the date line, and then they reverse full-on westerly winds in the 15 to 20 knot range. This is a good sign, finally, after 3 years of La Nina. Anyway, put this into motion. Notice this gale continues. This is actually a little bit of a resurgence of the gale. You get 35, 40 knot winds into Sunday evening, into Monday, and then it kind of peters out, but not completely. This will produce secondary fetch, secondary swell moving into the Hawaiian Islands and the U.S. West Coast, reinforcing swell that's already in the water. Tropical system builds. Looks like nearly 50 or 60 knot winds there. Otherwise, high pressure off Japan. This is by Monday night. We'll put this into motion. The tropical system lifts north. The system that was north of Hawaii pushes east towards the U.S. West Coast, 35 knot winds, and a new system develops over the dateline, 45 knot winds, all sort of aimed as before. You get a decent fetch here, so there's another system we're into Wednesday night. More fetch aimed down the 319 degree path into Hawaii, and sort of a generalized fetch in the 25 knot range aimed towards California up the, what is that, about 285 degree path, and actually a little fetch off of Northern California here too as well. Put this into motion. That system continues east into Friday and then kind of peters out as it moves up into the Gulf. 25 knot fetch is only wind swell. Probably nothing of real interest reaching the U.S. West Coast. And yet another system by Saturday on the northern dateline. 35 knot winds, maybe to 40 knots there. Nothing significant. But another little one behind it, stronger, with 45 knot winds on Sunday forecast. Again, Hawaii is probably the primary target, aimed down the 319 degree path. But also you have fetch here from the first pulse. What is that, about the 279 degree path into 285, sorry, into Northern California, and 296 for the stronger one, the small behind it, into Northern California as well. And then rounding it out, actually you get 55 knot winds in this last system, if it's believable. Again, a little bit aimed at Hawaii, 328. Probably more so towards Northern California up the 296. So something to watch, 295 degree path. So in all, a decently active pattern, but nothing significant, nothing huge. We'll also do a quick recap here of the storm that formed on the dateline, currently making swell, hitting Hawaii as of Sunday and bound into the U.S. West Coast by Tuesday. That's the 4th. This system developed on Wednesday, peaked out about Thursday morning, the 27th, 55 knot winds, aimed well down, mainly at Hawaii. What is that, about the 312, 313 degree path. Notice it's not nearly as directly aimed at California, sort of south of the 296 degree path into Northern California. Anyway, and it fell southeast again, favoring Hawaii on the 312 degree path. So that's relatively westerly. Good size fetch though. and then it just sort of continued east and started petering out on Saturday. You'll also notice this kind of unusual, very southward local gale that pushed into Southern California here on Sunday. It's just unusual that it was rather strong and rather close and rather far to the south. Next, let's take a look and see what impact those winds had on the ocean or will have on the ocean surface in terms of producing seas and therefore swell for the upcoming week. The main gale associated with that storm we were just looking at on the dateline is to pretty much be gone by Sunday night, but secondary fetch develops on the dateline. 24-foot, 25-foot seas again are expected by Sunday night, taking aim at Hawaii down the 328-degree path and continuing falling south. There we go, 26-foot seas by early Monday morning into Monday. All that falling directly at Hawaii, so that's good for another blast to swell probably by Wednesday or so. And should make for a nice long run of surf in the islands with size. Also, limited amounts of sideband energy coming into the U.S. West Coast, but most of this is pretty much cutting almost at, let's say, 60-plus degrees to any of the paths in Northern California, so not a lot of size expected to result from that. Also, seas associated with the tropical system in the far west Pacific. Mainly this is all aimed at Japan, of no interest to us other than the meteorological phenomenon of it actually occurring at all. Continue to roll this out. We're into middle of the week, Wednesday. Another little gale. Here we go, off of California, 22, almost 24-foot seas. Pushing towards Northern California, 280-degree path, and maybe a bit towards Southern California too. That's the 287, 285-degree path. So that's not bad, pretty far to the south. And here comes another system on the dateline. Roll this out. Gets decently organized. 30-foot seas by Thursday on the dateline. Again, probably targeting Hawaii. 32-foot seas. And what are we at? It looks like about 318, 319 degrees, something like that, falling southeast, and then trying to make a play to the west, but pretty much fading out altogether. Maybe sideband swell for the U.S. And then beyond that, another tiny system. We're into Sunday, a week out, projected on the dateline. That's too far off to be believable. But the short of it is, it looks like there is some continued activity. High likelihood of some swell. Size, probably Hawaii being the best situated. U.S. West Coast, more sideband energy. And also a quick analysis of the storm that formed on the dateline last week. That is Thursday, currently hitting the Hawaiian Islands. Got a nice little blast of maybe 41-foot seas targeting Hawaii, 312-degree path, just like what we saw in the wind model. But relative to Northern California, most of this energy is south of about the 292, 294-degree path. Put that into motion. See, it's all really falling at Hawaii, and you see the buoys in Hawaii. That's where all the size is. It's really a Hawaiian-based storm. Solid size, 38-foot seas into Friday. Then it finally petered out on early Saturday morning, 32, 34-foot seas and dying. So that swell is already hitting Hawaii. We're waiting for it to move into the U.S. West Coast by about Tuesday. And finally, regarding the dateline storm we were just talking about, let's get some JSON-2 data, see how that sort of played out. Models suggested maybe 38-foot seas associated with this storm, and we got average measurement, 15 measurement average, 34.6 degrees with a peak reading 37 feet, maybe just a little bit under what the model suggested, but not too bad. Play that out, see if we get another pass here. We got one. This was on Friday, the 28th of February. That was Friday. It suggested 32-foot seas. A couple of readings, 29.9 feet for the average, 33.4 feet. But just sort of looking at the general spread, the satellite suggested the seas were something less than what the model suggested here. Let me play this out. But then we got another pass just 6 hours later. Looks much, much better. Everywhere that the model said 30-foot seas, pretty much, just looking at the color layout here, for sure we got that. Actual data, 34.5 foot average seas with a peak of 40 feet where the model said about 34 to 35 feet. So this is pretty much right on track. So the models did a pretty good job, and that was it. So the swell should be about as projected relative to the U.S. West Coast, and based on buoy readings in Hawaii, that's about exactly what the storm and the models and the projections are all pretty much bearing out what the buoys are suggesting. Next, let's take a look at some long-term data, see if we can discern what's going to happen a week, a month, several months out, maybe 6 months out. Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia and Tahiti. Negative numbers on a daily index represent lower pressure around Tahiti, higher pressure over Darwin. That's indicative of the active phase of the MJO. And potentially El Nino if prolonged extension of negative numbers occurs. Interesting, we have a pretty good stretch going on here since about second week in February. Current data minus 8.71, not horribly negative, but pretty good. 30-day running average into negative territory finally, minus 1.99, and the 90-day running average still positive 2.91. Pretty much indicative of a neutral phase, neither El Nino nor La Nina, though clearly the active phase of the MJO is occurring because we have this long run of negative numbers. Next, we look at deviation from normal wind speeds. That's variations from what normally occurs. Standard is trades. At this point in time, we clearly have west anomalies in the far west Pacific. Here's the Philippines off here, Australia here. This has been going on for quite some time now, several weeks. This is consistent with a westerly wind burst. The tropical system that we were talking about earlier is a result of that westerly wind burst. It is not creating the westerly wind burst itself. It's the other way around. This is all good news. Prolonged stretches of westerly winds in the West Pacific help push warm water to depth and create what's known as a Kelvin wave. We'll get into that in a minute. As we move to the dateline, pretty much a neutral wind pattern. Looks like a bit of easterly anomalies once we get off to 160 west, south of Hawaii, but very light east anomalies, getting a little bit stronger south of Baja, and then pretty much going neutral into Central America. The forecast a week out suggests a definite slackening of those westerly anomalies, but still light west anomalies continuing. The biggest region is about 5 north to 5 south. You don't want looking beyond that doesn't really do too much in terms of monitoring Kelvin waves or watching for the formation of Kelvin waves. So generally a very weak westerly anomaly pattern suggested for the West Pacific a week out. And then you get into, go to the East Pacific and pretty much neutral, nothing going on. So it looks like our westerly wind burst has about done all that it's projected to do. Here's a historical view of what has been occurring. This being the West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Reds are westerly anomalies, blues are easterly anomalies. What you can clearly see is by about mid-February, we started getting westerly anomalies building in the West Pacific, peaked for a good long time from like the 21st of February into about today or tomorrow, let's say the 3rd of March, and still expected forecast to go on for another 7 days, then finally pretty much peter out about a week out. This is certainly good. The other part you'll notice is these anomalies are at the top of the scale, 12 meters a second difference. This is about the equivalent of the previous westerly wind burst that occurred in January in terms of velocity, but that one only had its peak winds going for about the equivalent of one of these blobs a couple of days. We've got a better part of a week or more of strong anomalies, so this is certainly should help form yet another Kelvin wave pushing to the east. This is very good news. Next, we're going to look at outgoing long-wave radiation forecast. Very similar to the wind anomaly forecast. Outgoing long-wave radiation, that is reflectivity off the ocean surface. Reds are indicative of high pressure, no overhead clouds, the inactive phase of the MJO. Blues are the active phase of the MJO, less reflectivity, more clouds. Clearly, the active phase is occurring on the dateline as of right now, this per the statistical model. Expected to phase out over the next 15 days, but still, basically for the next week, remain in play. That's good news. Then it looks like some form of the inactive phase is going to move into the West Pacific while a new active phase builds in the Indian Ocean. This next model, this is the dynamic model. We've pretty much thrown this out. It has been suggesting this just persistent pattern, but notice there's really no change. If you look at all the fine details, very little change. It almost looks like it's a 2 or 4 day pattern rather than a 2-week pattern. So we're throwing out, discounting it completely. This is the model that we're focusing on, and it seems to make sense and is reasonable. Consistent with that, we look at the long-range upper-level model. Greens are enhanced jet stream support for precipitation. The yellows, oranges are no support for precipitation. So the greens are basically the active phase of the MJO. The yellows, oranges, the inactive phase. Currently, here's where we're at. A fading active phase working its way into Central America, 17th of March, while the inactive phase takes hold over the West Pacific. It works its way across through about the first couple of days into April, maybe the first week, but at the same time, a stronger active phase builds over the West Pacific by 27th of March and makes its cycle across the Pacific through the 11th of April. So in terms of storm production, one would think that we've had a semi-decent run going on. Things will back off for probably 2 weeks or so while this inactive phase does its thing. And then potentially another burst of activity starting late March or so into early April, even mid-April. And that should be good for one more good storm cycle and swell cycle before it's pretty close to wrapping it up for the spring. And one look here at Southern Oscillation Index, the first set of numbers we looked at, notice how we were up into the inactive phase, the MJO positive numbers. We've been on a long negative run. We're just now tipping into negative territory. We have a ways to go to get into anything that would resemble El Nino. You'd want to be down here and hanging there for a considerable period of time. So one would say we're in a neutral territory as of right now, and that makes sense. Next, let's take a look at the effect of the pressure differentials we've been talking about, the wind differentials we've been talking about on ocean water temperatures at the surface. Though everything looks great from all the previous charts, here's the real fly in the ointment. You have this long, elongated stream of cool water pushing off Central America over the Galapagos, making it almost to a point south of Hawaii. We actually had warm water building up here a month ago. It almost looked like a weak El Nino signature, and then out of the blue we started getting weak easterly anomalies here and this cold water flow. The interesting part about it is it's not really it's almost like a weak La Nina, but it really isn't, because at the same time we've just had non-stop westerly anomalies going here, and that's pushing a lot of warm water to the east, and we'll see more about that in a minute. So this remains a perplexing situation. Weak easterly anomalies have persisted here. We have cooler than normal water, upwelling going on the equator, while in the west we have westerly anomalies and a lot of downwelling, potential Kelvin waves being formed, and there's this brick wall that's like right about here, let's say 170, and it's most interesting. Anyway, so that's the situation there. U.S. West Coast, and up here we've had this persistent warmer than normal water migrating from Japan into California. That continues. It looks unchanged. There was a little pool of cool water here, part of high pressure circulating, causing upwelling as these waters moved off of California towards Hawaii. That's all gone now. It's been gone for several weeks now. No sympathetic cool flow coming off of Africa either, though. Normally when you get this sort of cool pattern here, you might see something similar going off Africa. That's not occurring. So that's sort of encouraging as well. That suggests this is perhaps a localized condition. NOAA's been suggesting this is part of the upwelling phase of a previous Kelvin wave that impacted South America. I'm not so sure that I'm going to buy that, just due to the persistent easterly wind flow, easterly anomalies that have been going on here, and some other suggestions. But for now, we'll call it a neutral phase, though it really looks cold. But we'll get into details here. So here's another look. This is surface wind and water temperature anomalies. This is the actual winds and temperatures. Notice real westerly winds blowing in the West Pacific, stronger anomalies in the West Pacific. Here's the date line, here's the barrier, here's the cooler water. Now, of note, this was down at half a degree, 1 degree below normal. It's moderated some now. It's just generally half a degree or less, quarter of a degree cooler than normal. So that would suggest that there's actually some slackening of the cool pattern. That would be really good news. And of course, here's a chart that we've really been drilling on lately, and it's actually improving. This is actual water temperatures. This is the West Pacific. This is the East Pacific. This is depth in meters, 100, 200 meters. This is anomalies, variations from normal for this time of year, for this day in this time of year. Notice a large pool of warmer than normal water, almost 5 degrees above normal, going from well west of the date line, almost into Central America. 5-degree temperature variation. This is a large and significant Kelvin wave. This was created by the westerly wind burst that occurred in January, and yet we have another multi-week strong westerly wind burst that occurred here in late February, early March. The assumption is more warm water is being pushed down, filling into this existing Kelvin wave, likely making for a significant transport of warm water moving east. The one bit of concern was there was a pocket of 1 to 2 degree below normal water sitting here, part of that cool eddy that we saw coming off the Galapagos Islands. Notice now there's normal temperature waters starting to develop at depth, and this 1 degree below normal pocket is moving more and more to the east. This is beginning to make us think that maybe this whole thing's going to shut down here pretty soon. This Kelvin wave will blast in here and just wipe out any trace of the cool pocket. But there's still some concern that the cool pocket might sort of keep a cap on the Kelvin wave. So we're just going to have to watch. The suspicion is the Kelvin wave will take over, but we're going to hedge our bets and say, still beware. Nothing's guaranteed till it happens. So wrapping it all up, one swell in the water hitting Hawaii, moving towards the U.S. West Coast, a reinforcing similar sort of system. Main swell focus will be Hawaii after today's swell gets through in Hawaii, and reinforcements to the U.S. West Coast, and then a series of smaller systems right behind that, again focused on Hawaii, U.S. West Coast, maybe get sideband energy from it. Of most concern, though, a lot of warm water being transported to the east, large Kelvin wave going on, westerly anomalies, all suggestive of a significant change in the atmosphere and the ocean in the weeks and months to come. This is a good news and a good sign that finally La Nina is over, dead with, and we're moving into a more favorable regime for the next year at least. And that is good news. So we want to thank Vunabaka one more time for their sponsorship and support for this forecast. And thank you for watching and enjoying. We appreciate your comments on the YouTube channel, and we'll do this again next week, same time, same place. Thank you.